The platform smelled like manure and desperation. Mara stood at the end of the line, trying not to exist. 10 women total, shipped in on the afternoon stage like bolts of fabric or bags of grain. The younger ones, girls really, some barely 17, fidgeted with their bonnets and glanced at the crowd with something that looked like hope. Stupid hope, the kind that got crushed fast out here. She knew better. At 34, Mara Calloway had outlived hope by at least a decade. She'd also outlived 2 factory jobs, a boarding house eviction, and a sister who'd promised to send for her but never did. Now she was here, in Copper Hollow, standing in a dress that didn't fit right and boots that pinched, waiting to be chosen by a man she'd never met. The town square was packed, men lined up 3 deep against the hitching posts, hats pulled low, eyes hungry. Some were young, most weren't. All of them looked like they'd been chewed up by this land and spit out meaner. "Gentlemen!" The auctioneer, not really an auctioneer, just some land agent named Pritchard who'd organized this whole mess, stepped forward with a grin that showed too many teeth. "As promised, 10 fine women, fresh from the east, ready to make homes and families here in Copper Hollow." A few men hooted. One of them spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Pritchard gestured down the line. "Each man who's paid his deposit gets first selection in the order determined by lot. After that, it's first come, first serve for any unclaimed ladies." Unclaimed. Mara's stomach twisted. The first man stepped up, a rancher named Garrett, from what she'd overheard. Tall, clean-shaven, maybe 40. He walked past Mara without a glance and stopped in front of a blonde girl with dimples. "This one." The girl looked relieved. They moved off to the side to sign papers. It went fast after that. Second man took the quiet brunette with the nice skin. Third man picked the redhead who'd been crying since they left St. Louis. Fourth, fifth, sixth. The line thinned out like pulled teeth. Each time Mara felt smaller. Each time she told herself it didn't matter. But it did. By the time 8 women had been chosen, only 2 remained. Mara and a tiny thing named Sarah who couldn't have been more than 19 with big eyes and a trembling mouth. The 9th man didn't hesitate. He took Sarah. That left Mara. And no one. The crowd had started to disperse. Men were leading their new brides toward wagons, toward futures, toward something. Pritchard shuffled his papers, looking uncomfortable. "Well," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "seems we've had a miscalculation." Mara's face burned. She could feel every eye on her, every whisper. "You mean nobody wants her?" Someone called from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the square. Pritchard cleared his throat. The arrangement was for 9 brides. 10 were sent by mistake. Mrs. Calloway here was an administrative error. An error. She'd been called worse, fat, ugly, used up, but somehow error cut deeper than any of it. "What happens to her?" another voice asked. Pritchard looked pained. "She'll be sent back on the next stage. We'll refund her passage, naturally." Who the hell paid for a refund? That was Garrett, the rancher, already halfway to his wagon with the blonde. "She signed the contract, same as the others. Not our problem if she's—" He didn't finish, but he didn't have to. Mara's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, nails biting into her palms. "Don't cry. Don't you dare cry in front of these bastards." "Perhaps," Pritchard said delicately, "one of the gentlemen might reconsider. I'll take her." The voice came from the back of the crowd, low and rough as gravel scraping stone. Everyone turned. A man sat on a horse at the edge of the square. Not a regular horse, something bigger, darker, built like it could carry a mountain. The rider matched it. Huge didn't quite cover it. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, shoulders like an ox yoke, hands that could probably crack walnuts without trying. Dark hair fell past his collar. His face was all hard angles and old scars, the kind you didn't get from accidents. Rhett Calder. Even Mara had heard the name, whispered on the stage ride in. Mountain man. Trapper. Some said he'd killed a grizzly with a knife. Others said he'd killed men the same way and nobody could prove otherwise. The crowd parted as he rode forward. His horse's hooves thudded heavy in the dirt. He stopped in front of the platform and looked directly at Mara. His eyes were pale gray, like creek ice in winter. "You the last one?" His voice matched his size, deep, blunt, no softness in it. Mara managed a nod. "You healthy? Got all your teeth?" Heat flooded her face, but she lifted her chin. Yes. Can you work? Yes. Then I'll take you. Pritchard sputtered. Mr. Calder, I'm not sure. There's been a mistake in the count, and Mrs. Calloway's passage should really. I paid my deposit same as everyone else. Rhett pulled a folded paper from his coat. Says here I get a bride. That her? Well, technically, yes, but then we're done. He swung down from the horse, his boots hitting the ground with an impact you could feel. He walked up to the platform and held out one massive hand toward Mara. Come on. She stared at his hand. It was scarred across the knuckles, dirt under the nails, calluses thick as boot leather. Nothing soft about it, nothing gentle. She looked at his face. No smile, no warmth. Just that cold, steady gaze, waiting. Behind her, Pritchard was still talking. Mr. Calder, perhaps we should discuss the terms. There's been an irregular. You coming or not? Rhett asked Mara. It wasn't really a question. It was a choice. Stay here and be shipped back east like damaged goods, or go with this stranger into the mountains. Mara took his hand. His grip was solid, impersonal. He pulled her down from the platform like she weighed nothing and jerked his head toward the horse. You ride? Not really. You'll learn. He lifted her onto the saddle, just picked her up and set her there like a sack of flour. She grabbed the pommel, heart hammering. The horse shifted under her, enormous and restless. Rhett mounted behind her, one arm coming around to take the reins. She could feel the heat of him at her back, solid as a wall. Mr. Calder! Pritchard hurried over, waving papers. You'll need to sign the... Mail it. Rhett turned the horse. But the legal documents, there are conditions. I said mail it. He kicked the horse into motion. Mara grabbed tighter as they lurched forward, her stomach dropping. The crowd blurred past. She caught glimpses of faces, some shocked, some amused, some calculating. She saw Sarah, the last girl chosen, staring after them with wide eyes. Then they were past the buildings, past the last fence, and heading north toward the mountains. The town fell away behind them. Neither of them spoke. The road, if you could call it that, was barely more than a track through scrub grass and scattered pine. The horse moved at a steady walk, its gait rolling and unfamiliar. Mara gripped the pommel until her fingers ached. Rhett's arm was iron around her, keeping her steady. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and something sharp she couldn't name. His breathing was even, unbothered. After maybe 20 minutes, she found her voice. Where are we going? Home. Where's home? North. Not exactly helpful. She tried again. How far? 2 days. 2 days. On a horse. With a man she didn't know, riding into wilderness she'd never seen. What the hell had she just done? You got a problem with that? He asked. No. Good. More silence. The sun was starting to sink, painting the sky rust and gold. The air was cooler up here, cleaner. Back in the city, everything had smelled like coal smoke and rot. This was different, pine and earth and distance. What's your name? He asked suddenly. Mara. Mara Calloway. You got people back east? No. Husband before? No. He grunted. Not quite approval, not quite anything, just acknowledgement. Why'd you come out here? He asked. She almost laughed. Didn't have anywhere else to go. Fair enough. Another mile passed. The mountains were getting closer, dark shapes against the fading light. They looked impossibly big. Why'd you pick me? The question came out before she could stop it. Rhett didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was matter of fact. You looked like you could handle it. Handle what? Living. She didn't know what to say to that. They rode until the light was almost gone. Then Rhett pulled the horse off the trail into a small clearing near a creek. He dismounted and lifted Mara down, then started unsaddling the horse with efficient, practiced movements. There's deadfall over there. He nodded toward a fallen pine. Gather what you can for a fire. Mara's legs were shaking from the ride, but she went. The wood was dry, brittle. She gathered an armful and brought it back to where Rhett was hobbling the horse. He'd already cleared a fire pit and arranged rocks in a circle. He took the wood, arranged it, and had flames going in under a minute. No fuss, no wasted motion. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a canvas-wrapped bundle and unwrapped it to reveal jerky, hard biscuits, and a canteen. He handed her a piece of jerky. Eat. She did. It was tough, salty, and tasted better than anything she'd had in weeks. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. Overhead, stars were starting to show, more stars than Mara had ever seen in her life. In the city, the sky had always been hazy, dim. Out here, it was huge and bright and relentless. You'll sleep there. Rhett pointed to a spot near the fire. I'll be over there. He gestured to the other side. Okay. He pulled a blanket from the saddle and tossed it to her. Gets cold at night. She caught it. Thank you. He nodded and moved to the far side of the fire, settling down with his back against a log. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out. Mara wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down on the hard ground. Every muscle ached. Her mind was spinning, but her body was done. She stared up at the stars and thought about the platform, the laughter, the way Pritchard had called her an error. And then she thought about Rhett's hand reaching down. You looked like you could handle it. She didn't know if that was true, but maybe she could learn. Bas. They rode hard the next day. Rhett didn't believe in stopping. They paused once at midday to water the horse and eat more jerky, then kept moving. The terrain got rougher, steeper, rockier, the trail barely visible in places. Mara's backside was raw, her thighs screaming, but she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. You doing all right? Rhett asked once, his voice neutral. Fine. You're a bad liar. Despite everything, she almost smiled. I'll live. Yeah, you will. By late afternoon, they'd climbed high enough that the air was thin and sharp. Pine forests pressed in on both sides. The horse picked its way carefully over loose stones. Almost there, Rhett said. She didn't see anything that looked like there. Just more trees, more rocks, more mountain. Then they rounded a bend, and the trees opened up. The cabin sat in a small clearing backed up against a sheer rock face. It was solid, built from logs that had been stripped and fitted tight. A stone chimney rose from one end. A small porch wrapped the front. Behind it, a lean-to stable and a root cellar dug into the hillside. It wasn't much, but it was built to last. Rhett rode up to the stable and dismounted, then lifted Mara down. Her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground. He caught her arm, steadied her. You'll adjust, he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He unsaddled the horse, rubbed it down, gave it grain and water. Mara watched, trying to be useful, but she didn't know what to do. Everything out here was foreign. When he was done, he led her to the cabin. Inside it was one large room. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall. A table and 2 chairs sat near it. A bed frame with a straw mattress in one corner. Shelves lined with tin plates, cups, a few books. A rifle hung above the door. It was clean, sparse, functional. You'll sleep there. Rhett nodded to the bed. I'll take the floor. Mara blinked. You don't have to. I do. His voice was flat. You're here because you signed a contract. That don't mean I'm touching you unless you say different. Her face burned. I didn't. I know. He set his pack down, just making it clear. He moved to the fireplace and started building a fire with the same brisk efficiency he did everything. Within minutes, warmth spread through the room. From a shelf, he pulled down a pot and a sack of beans. You know how to cook? Some. Good. I'll teach you the rest. He showed her where the water barrel was, how to soak the beans, how to slice the salt pork he kept hanging from the rafters. His instructions were blunt, simple. Do this, not that. Here's why. She listened, watched, tried not to get in his way. By the time the stew was bubbling over the fire, night had fallen. Rhett lit a single lamp and set it on the table. They ate in silence, the same as the night before. But this silence felt different, less empty. After dinner, Rhett cleaned the dishes in a bucket of water. Mara dried them with a rag and put them back on the shelf. Tomorrow, I'll show you around, he said. The well, the garden plot, the smokehouse. You'll need to know where things are. All right, he glanced at her. You have questions. Ask them now. She had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. Why'd you really choose me? He was quiet for a long moment. his hands stilling on the dish he was scrubbing. "Because the rest of them looked like they'd break," he said finally, "and I can't afford broken." It wasn't romantic, it wasn't kind, but it was honest. "Get some sleep," he said, turning back to the bucket. Morning comes early. Mara lay down on the straw mattress, still wearing her dress. She pulled the blanket over her and stared at the ceiling beams. Across the room, Rhett settled onto a bedroll on the floor, his back to her. The fire crackled. Wind whispered through the pines outside. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara felt something other than afraid. She didn't have a word for it yet, but it was there. The days fell into a rhythm. Rhett woke before dawn every morning, already moving by the time Mara stirred. He'd have the fire going and coffee boiling. She learned to get up fast, to dress while he was outside checking the traps or feeding the horse. Breakfast was usually cornmeal mush or leftover stew. They ate quickly. Then the work began. He taught her everything: how to draw water from the well without spilling half of it, how to tend the small vegetable garden he'd planted in the clearing, carrots, potatoes, onions, tough things that could survive up here, how to recognize animal tracks, how to tell good deadfall from rot. She learned to split kindling without hitting her own foot, to gut a rabbit without retching, to patch a hole in her skirt with gut thread and a bone needle. None of it was easy. But Rhett didn't coddle her. When she screwed up, he showed her once how to fix it, then expected her to remember. When she did something right, he nodded and moved on. It was the strangest partnership she'd ever been part of. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was direct, useful. "See that ridge?" He pointed north one morning while they were hauling water. "Storm comes from there. You'll have maybe an hour before it hits. Get inside and bar the door." "What about you?" "I'll get inside too." Another day he showed her the root cellar. "Potatoes here, smoked meat there. If something happens to me, this'll last you through winter." "What would happen to you?" He shrugged. "Bear, rock slide, stupid mistake, doesn't matter. You need to know where the food is." She wanted to ask more, but his face had that closed look it got sometimes. So she just memorized where everything was stored. Evenings, after the work was done, they'd sit by the fire. Sometimes Rhett would carve. Small things, spoons or bowls, his knife moving with surprising delicacy for such big hands. Sometimes he'd read one of the 3 books he owned. Sometimes he just stared into the flames. Mara mended clothes, or tried to. Her stitching was clumsy, but it held. One night, maybe 2 weeks in, she asked, "Were you ever married before?" His knife stilled. "Yeah." "What happened?" "She died." The way he said it, flat, final, told her not to push. But she was tired of silence. "How long ago?" 3 years. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "It was winter. Fever took her fast. Nothing I could do." "That why you live up here alone?" "Part of it." He went back to carving. The conversation was over, but the next night he asked her something. "You got family back east?" "Had a sister. She left for California 5 years ago. Haven't heard from her since." "Parents?" "Dead. My father when I was 12. Mama 2 years after." "How'd you manage?" "Factory work, boarding houses, whatever I could find." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about going back?" "To what?" He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just recognition. "Fair point," he said. "Dab." A month passed. Mara's hands, which had been soft and useless, grew calluses. Her back stopped aching every morning. She learned to wake when the light changed, to read weather in the way the wind shifted. She learned Rhett's rhythms, too. How he went quiet before a storm. How he checked the rifle every night before bed. How he always positioned himself between her and the door. She learned he was a good cook, better than her, though he'd never say it, that he hated waste. That he could track a deer for 2 days without complaint, but got irritable if the coffee ran out. She learned he had nightmares. She'd wake sometimes to hear him breathing hard in the dark, fighting something only he could see. She never mentioned it. He never mentioned hers. They were becoming something, not husband and wife, not really, but not strangers either. Partners, maybe. One afternoon she was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats. She straightened, shading her eyes. 3 men rode into the clearing. They weren't trappers. Their clothes were too clean, their horses too well fed. The man in front wore a suit jacket and a hat that had never seen a day's real work. Mara's stomach dropped. Rhett came out of the cabin, the rifle in his hands. Not raised, just there. "Help you?" His voice was cold. The man in the suit smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Calder, been a while." "Not long enough, Harlan." Harlan. Mara remembered that name from town. Victor Harlan. He owned the land office, the general store, half the mining claims in the territory. Now, Harlan's smile widened. "Is that any way to greet an old friend?" "We ain't friends." "No, I suppose we're not." Harlan's gaze shifted to Mara. His eyes crawled over her, assessing. "This the mail-order bride I heard about?" Rhett's grip on the rifle tightened. "None of your business." "Actually, it is." Harlan pulled a paper from his coat. "See, there's been a complaint. Seems the arrangement in Copper Hollow wasn't entirely legal. Some of those women were contracted under false pretenses. And one of them," he looked at Mara again, "was never supposed to be sold at all." Mara's blood ran cold. "Bullshit," Rhett said. "I have the documentation right here. Mrs. Calloway's passage was paid by a benefactor back east. She was meant to come west, yes, but not as a bride, as an employee, a housekeeper for a respectable family." He folded the paper. "Unfortunately, there was a mix-up at the agency. She ended up on the wrong manifest." "Then why are you here and not the family?" Harlan's smile turned sharp. "Because the family has since reconsidered. They've asked me to collect Mrs. Calloway and arrange her return passage. As a representative of the territorial government, I'm obligated to comply. She's my wife." "Do you have a marriage certificate?" Silence. "No?" Harlan sighed, mock sympathetic. "Then I'm afraid she's not your wife. She's stolen property, and you, Mr. Calder, are in violation of territorial law." One of the other men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward a holster. Rhett saw it. His rifle came up smooth and fast, barrel aimed dead center at Harlan's chest. "Get off my land!" Harlan didn't flinch. "I'll be back with the sheriff, and when I do, you'll hang for this." "Looking forward to it." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Harlan touched the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Calloway, I'll see you soon." He turned his horse and rode out, his men following. Mara stood frozen, heart hammering. Rhett lowered the rifle. He didn't look at her. "Inside," he said. She followed him into the cabin. He barred the door, set the rifle by the window, and started pacing. "That true?" he asked. "You have family that paid your passage." "No, I paid my own way. Saved for 2 years to afford it." "Then he's lying." "Of course he's lying." She sank into a chair, shaking. "But it won't matter. He'll come back with men and guns and whatever story he wants." Rhett stopped pacing. "Why's he want you?" "I don't know." But even as she said it, she knew. She'd seen the way Harlan looked at her, not with desire, with calculation. He wanted leverage. Rhett had something Harlan wanted, land, water rights, something, and he was using her to get it. "He won't take you," Rhett said quietly. "You can't fight the law. Watch me." He moved to the shelves and started pulling down supplies. Ammunition, rope, nails. His movements were deliberate, methodical. "What are you doing?" Mara asked. "Preparing." "For what?" He looked at her then, and his eyes were colder than she'd ever seen them. "For war." The next 3 days moved like cold molasses. Rhett worked from dawn past dusk, fortifying the cabin with a focus that bordered on obsession. He reinforced the door with crossbeams cut from pine logs, nailed wooden shutters over the windows that could be barred from inside. He dug a trench around the perimeter and filled it with sharpened stakes. Mara helped where she could. She hauled water, carried lumber, held board steady while he hammered. Her hands blistered and bled, but she didn't stop. Fear had a way of making you strong when you couldn't afford to be weak. "You ever been in a fight before?" Rhett asked on the second day. They were on the roof, reinforcing the chimney with stones to prevent anyone from dropping something down it. "Not the kind you're talking about." "It's loud, confusing. People don't die like they do in books." He set another stone, his voice flat. "They scream, they beg. Sometimes they shit themselves." She swallowed hard. You trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you. Well, you're doing both. He glanced at her, something almost like approval in his eyes. Good. Scared keeps you alive. That night, he taught her to load the rifle. His hands guided hers, showing her how to sight down the barrel, how to compensate for wind and distance. Don't aim for the chest, he said. Everyone aims for the chest. Ribs deflect bullets more than you'd think. You get one shot, you aim for the stomach. Man gets gut shot, he goes down and stays down. That's cruel. That's survival. She practiced until her shoulder ached from the kick. The first few times she pulled the trigger, she flinched, but Rhett made her do it again and again, until the flinch became something smaller. You won't be a sharpshooter in 3 days, he said, as they cleaned the rifle by lamplight, but you might hit something that matters. You really think they're coming back? I know they are. He ran the cleaning rod through the barrel with practiced strokes. Harlan doesn't make threats. He makes promises. What does he want from you? Rhett was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. Water rights? There's a spring about 2 miles north of here, feeds into the valley below. Harlan's been trying to buy this land for years. Wants to dam the spring, sell water to the mining camps. He set the rifle aside. I told him no. So he's using me to force you out. That's about the size of it. Mara stared into the fire. You could just let me go. Give him what he wants. No? Rhett, no. He looked at her, and there was something hard and immovable in his face. You're here because I chose you. That makes you mine to protect. I don't give up what's mine. The possessiveness in his words should have bothered her. A month ago it would have. But out here, in this place where everything was hard and nothing was promised, it felt different. It felt like safety. What was your wife's name? She asked quietly. His jaw tightened. Anna. She would have hated me. That surprised him. Why? Because I'm sitting in her house, sleeping in her bed, and part of me is glad she's gone because if she wasn't, I'd be dead in some alley back east. Rhett studied her for a long moment. Anna was good, kind. She never would have survived what you've been through. He stood, moving to the window to check the shutters. She would have liked you, and she would have understood. Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Storm coming. She could feel it in the air. Rhett felt it too. We've got maybe a day before they come, maybe less if Harlan's in a hurry. What do? We wait, and when they get here, we make them regret it. The storm hit that night. Rain drummed on the roof like fists, and wind screamed through the pines. Lightning lit up the shuttered windows in stark white flashes. Thunder shook the walls. Mara lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the violence outside. Rhett was at the table, cleaning his pistol by lamplight. He hadn't slept in 2 days. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his movements had started to slow. You need to rest, she said. I'm fine. You're exhausted. I said I'm fine. Lightning cracked close, the thunder immediate and deafening. The lamp flickered. Mara sat up. What happens if they come tonight, in the storm? They won't. Harlan's too smart for that. He'll wait until he has the advantage. And when's that? Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. He reassembled the pistol with quick, efficient movements. He'll come with the sheriff, make it look legal. Probably bring 6 or 7 men, enough to overwhelm us if we don't cooperate. And if we do cooperate, then I hang for kidnapping and you disappear. He looked at her. You understand what that means? Disappear? She understood. Women disappeared all the time out here. Sold, traded, worked to death in camps where no one asked questions. The frontier ate people and left no bones. So we fight. Another crack of lightning. The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. Mara's heart jumped into her throat. Don't move, Rhett said. She heard him cross the room, heard the scrape of flint and steel. Sparks showered in the dark. The lamp caught, glowing weak and orange. His face in the lamplight looked carved from stone. Get some sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. Wake me in a few hours. You can't stay up forever. He didn't argue, which told her how tired he really was. She lay back down, but sleep was a long time coming. The storm raged on, and somewhere out there in the dark, men were planning to take everything they'd built. She thought about the platform in Copper Hollow, the laughter, the way Pritchard had called her an error. She thought about Rhett's hand reaching down. She thought about the rifle by the window and how her shoulder would ache tomorrow from the kick. And somewhere in the space between thunder and rain, she fell asleep. She woke to gray dawn light and silence. The storm had passed. Water dripped from the eaves, steady and rhythmic. The air smelled clean, scrubbed. Rhett was asleep in the table, his head pillowed on his arms, the pistol inches from his hand. He looked younger like this, less hard. The scar on his jaw stood out white against his skin. Mara got up quietly and started the fire. She made coffee, cornmeal mush, salt pork, normal things, as if this were a normal day. When the food was ready, she touched Rhett's shoulder. He came awake instantly, hand going to the pistol. "Easy," she said. "It's just me." He blinked, orienting himself. Then he relaxed, marginally. "What time is it?" "Early. Sun's barely up." He scrubbed a hand over his face and stood, moving to the window. He opened the shutter a crack and looked out. "See anything?" Mara asked. "Not yet." They ate in tense silence. The food tasted like ash, but Mara forced it down. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety, but she'd learned that hunger made you stupid, and she couldn't afford stupid today. After breakfast, Rhett did a perimeter check while Mara cleaned up. When he came back, his face was grim. Fresh tracks, 4 horses, maybe 5. Stopped about a quarter mile down the trail. "When?" "This morning. They're watching, waiting to see what we do." "What do we do?" "Nothing. We stay inside, stay ready." He barred the door and checked the rifle. "They'll make the first move, probably try to talk us out. Harlan likes to pretend he's civilized." "And when talking doesn't work?" "Then it gets ugly." The morning crawled past. Rhett stayed at the window watching. Mara sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, trying not to jump at every sound. Around midday, Rhett tensed. "They're coming." Mara's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood, legs shaking, and moved to the second window. Through the crack in the shutter, she could see riders emerging from the tree line. 7 men. Harlan in front, dressed like he was going to a Sunday social. Behind him, 6 others, hard-looking men with rifles and cold eyes. One of them wore a sheriff's badge, tin and dull in the weak sunlight. They stopped about 50 yards out. "Calder," Harlan's voice carried across the clearing. "Let's talk like reasonable men." Rhett didn't answer. "I have the sheriff with me, and a legal writ for the return of Mrs. Calloway." Harlan held up a piece of paper. "You're in violation of territorial law. Release her now and we'll forget this whole mess." Still nothing from Rhett. Harlan's smile thinned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Go to hell, Harlan," Rhett's voice boomed from the cabin, flat and final. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. He was a thick man with a gut and nervous eyes. "Mr. Calder, I don't want trouble, but I got a legal writ here. You got to comply." "That writ's horseshit and you know it, Morrison." Morrison flinched. "That's not for me to decide. I'm just doing my job." "Your job is enforcing the law, not helping Harlan steal land." "Nobody's stealing," Morrison started, but Harlan cut him off. "Enough." Harlan's voice went cold. "Calder, you have 1 hour to send the woman out. If you don't, we're coming in. And if we have to come in, things will go badly for you." "Try it." Harlan's smile was gone now. "You're outnumbered 7-1. You can't win this." "Maybe, but I'll take 3 of you with me, starting with you." One of the men behind Harlan raised his rifle. Rhett's barrel shifted, tracking him. The man froze. 1 hour, Harlan said. He turned his horse and rode back toward the trees, the others following. When they were gone, Mara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "They'll come back," Rhett said. He moved away from the window and started pulling ammunition from a shelf. "And when they do, it'll be fast." "What do you need me to do?" He looked at her, weighing something. Then he handed her the pistol. "You know how to use this?" "Not really." "Point and shoot, that's all it is." He showed her how to cock it, how to hold it steady. "It kicks less than the rifle, but it's harder to aim. Don't try to hit anything more than 10 feet away." She took the pistol. It was heavier than she expected, the metal cold against her palm. "If they get inside," Rhett said quietly, "you use that. You don't hesitate. You don't think. You just shoot. What about you? I'll be at the door. He picked up the rifle and checked the load. They'll come in hard, try to overwhelm us. I'll take as many as I can from the windows, but some will get through. His eyes met hers. When they do, you make them pay for it. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They waited. An hour passed, then another. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening. Mara's hands cramped around the pistol. She set it down, flexed her fingers, picked it up again. Rhett stood motionless at the window, a statue carved from violence and patience. Then, just as the sun started to sink toward the mountains, he spoke. Here we come. Mara looked out. The riders were moving in, slow and spread out. 3 from the front, 2 flanking from the sides, 2 hanging back with rifles raised. They weren't talking anymore. Get down, Rhett said. Mara dropped below the window. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The riders stopped about 30 yards out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the flanking men raised a torch. No, Mara breathed. He threw it. The torch arced through the air and hit the roof with a dull thump. Flames licked up the shingles. Rhett swore and fired. The shot cracked loud in the cabin. Through the window, Mara saw one of the riders jerk and fall from his horse. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Bullets punched through the shutters, splintering wood. Rhett worked the rifle with brutal efficiency, firing, reloading, firing again. Mara pressed herself against the wall, the pistol shaking in her hands. Another torch hit the roof. Then another. Smoke started to curl down from the ceiling. We can't stay here, Mara shouted over the gunfire. I know! Rhett fired again. Another man went down. But there were still 4 out there, and the roof was burning. He turned to her. The root cellar. There's a tunnel in the back, leads to the creek. You go now while they're focused on the front. What about you? I'll hold them here, then follow. That's suicide. It's the only way you get out. A bullet punched through the wall inches from her head. She yelped and ducked. Rhett grabbed her arm. Listen to me. You go to the creek. Follow it downstream until you hit the old trapper's cabin. You remember where that is? Rhett, do you remember? Yes. You get there and you hide. I'll find you. I'm not leaving you. His hand tightened on her arm, just short of painful. You don't get a choice. Go, now. He shoved her toward the back of the cabin. Smoke was thicker now, acrid and choking. Flames crawled across the ceiling. Mara stumbled toward the root cellar door. She looked back once. Rhett was at the window, silhouetted against the firelight, the rifle barking in his hands. Then she pulled open the cellar door and dropped into the dark. The tunnel was narrow, dirt-walled, barely high enough to crouch. She crawled forward on hands and knees, the pistol clutched in one hand. Behind her, gunfire and shouting echoed down the shaft. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Her lungs burned. Her hands scraped against rocks. The dark was absolute. Then, finally, she saw light ahead, pale and gray. She crawled faster and burst out of the tunnel into evening air. The creek rushed past a few feet away, cold and loud. She sucked in air, coughing, her eyes streaming. Behind her, up the hill, orange light flickered through the trees. The cabin was burning, and Rhett was still inside. She started back toward the tunnel, but a hand clamped over her mouth. She thrashed, trying to scream, but the hand was iron. An arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground. Quiet! The voice was rough, unfamiliar. She bit down hard. The man swore and threw her. She hit the ground, rolled, came up with the pistol raised. The man was one of Harlan's, lean, scarred, with eyes like a snake. His hand was bleeding where she'd bitten him. Drop it, he said, raising his own gun. Mara pulled the trigger. The pistol roared. The kick slammed her wrist. The bullet went wide, clipping the man's shoulder instead of his chest. He staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. But he didn't go down. He lunged at her. She fired again. This time, she didn't miss. The bullet caught him in the stomach. He folded, gasping, and collapsed into the creek. The water turned red around him. Mara stood frozen, the pistol smoking in her hand. She'd just killed a man. She'd just killed a man. Her stomach heaved. She doubled over and vomited into the grass. Then gunfire cracked from up the hill, and she remembered. Rhett. She wiped her mouth and ran. The cabin was fully engulfed when she got there. Flames roared through the roof, eating the walls. Heat pushed at her like a physical thing. 3 bodies lay in the clearing. 2 more were wounded, crawling toward the tree line. Harlan and the sheriff were gone. Run off or dead, she didn't know. And Rhett was nowhere. "Rhett!" She screamed it, raw and desperate. "Rhett!" A shape moved near the stable. She spun, raising the pistol. Rhett stumbled out of the smoke, coughing, his shirt burned and bloodied. He was limping, one hand pressed to his side. "You were supposed to run," he rasped. "Yeah, well, I'm bad at following orders." She ran to him, got under his good arm. He sagged against her, heavier than she expected. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." He coughed again and blood flecked his lips. "Got clipped in the side, maybe a rib. Can you walk? Do I have a choice?" Together they stumbled toward the creek. Behind them the cabin groaned and collapsed inward, sending up a shower of sparks. Everything Rhett had built was gone. They made it to the tunnel entrance. Rhett looked at it and shook his head. "Can't crawl. You'll have to help me around the long way." It took an hour to reach the trapper's cabin. An hour of stumbling through underbrush, of Rhett's labored breathing, of Mara's muscles screaming. But they made it. The cabin was small, abandoned years ago, but the roof was intact and the walls solid. Mara got Rhett inside and lowered him onto the dirt floor. His shirt was soaked with blood. "Let me see," she said. He lifted his hand. The wound was a ragged tear along his ribs, still bleeding. Not as bad as it could have been, but bad enough. "I need to stop the bleeding," Mara said. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "There's a creek out back, clean water." Rhett's voice was fading. "And you'll need to burn it closed. Can't risk infection." "Burn it?" "Fire. Knife. You know how." She didn't, but she'd figure it out. She found the creek, washed her hands and the wound as best she could. Then she built a fire outside and heated Rhett's knife in the flames until it glowed red. When she came back inside, he was pale, sweating. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I know." She pressed the hot metal to his flesh. The smell of burning skin filled the cabin. Rhett's back arched, every muscle rigid, but he didn't scream. When it was done, she bandaged him with strips torn from her skirt. Her hands were steady now. Strange what fear could do. Rhett's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow. "You still with me?" she asked. Unfortunately. Despite everything, she almost laughed. "You're too mean to die." "That's the idea." She sat back against the wall, exhausted. The pistol was still in her belt, sticky with blood. Hers, Rhett's, the man at the creeks. She didn't remember picking it up. "We killed them," she said quietly. "Some of them." "Yeah." "Harlan's going to come back. With more men." "Probably." "So what do we do?" Rhett opened his eyes and looked at her. In the dim firelight, they were the color of smoke. "We survive. Same as always." Outside, night had fallen. The forest was dark and full of sounds. Wind, water, things moving in the underbrush. Mara thought about the cabin burning, about the bodies in the clearing, about the man she'd shot, the way he'd folded into the creek. She thought about Rhett's blood on her hands, and the way he'd looked at her when she came back instead of running. She'd been an error, a mistake, unwanted. But she wasn't anymore. "Get some rest," Rhett said. "We'll figure out the next part in the morning." She wanted to argue, wanted to plan, to prepare, to do something, but exhaustion was a weight she couldn't carry anymore. She lay down on the dirt floor next to him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. And for the second time that night, she fell asleep to the sound of violence echoing in her head. Morning came cold and gray, the kind that made your bones ache. Mara woke to find Rhett already up, sitting against the wall with the rifle across his lap. His face was the color of old parchment, his breathing shallow. "You should be resting," she said. "Can't afford to." He shifted, winced. "We need to move before they regroup." "You can barely stand." "I'll manage." She wanted to argue, but his jaw had that set to it that meant he'd already made up his mind. Instead, she checked his bandages. Blood had seeped through during the night, but the wound wasn't festering. Small mercies. "We need supplies," she said. "Food, ammunition, medicine if we can find it. There's a trading post about 15 miles east, run by a man named Cook. He's no friend of Harlan's." Can we trust him? Rhett's laugh was bitter. Out here, you don't trust anyone. But Cook hates Harlan more than he'd profit from turning us in. That's close enough. They left at first light. Rhett couldn't ride, so they walked, moving slow through pine forests that smelled like rain and rot. Every few hundred yards, he had to stop and lean against a tree, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Mara carried the rifle. It was heavier than she remembered, the strap digging into her shoulder. The pistol was tucked in her belt, a hard reminder against her hip. She'd killed a man with that pistol. The thought kept circling back, ugly and insistent. She could still see his face, the way his eyes had gone wide when the bullet hit, the way he'd folded into the creek. "You're thinking too much," Rhett said. She glanced at him. "About what?" "The man you shot." Her stomach tightened. "How'd you know?" "Because I've seen that look before. In the mirror." He paused to catch his breath. "You want me to tell you it gets easier, but it doesn't. You just get better at carrying it." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's supposed to keep you alive." He started walking again, slower now. "You did what you had to do. That's all there is." But it didn't feel like all there is. It felt like something had cracked open inside her, something that couldn't be sealed back up. They walked in silence for another hour. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to scrubland and rock. In the distance, Mara could see smoke rising from a chimney. "That's Cook's place," Rhett said. The trading post was a squat building made of logs and stone, with a stable out back and a hand-painted sign that read Cook's Goods and Sundries. A few horses were tied outside, their breath steaming in the cold air. Rhett stopped at the tree line. "Let me do the talking, and keep that rifle ready but not raised. We don't want to spook anyone." They crossed the open ground to the trading post. A bell jangled when Rhett pushed open the door. Inside, it smelled like tobacco and leather and old coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from sacks of flour to boxes of ammunition. A pot-bellied stove crackled in the corner. 3 men stood at the counter, rough-looking types in worn coats and hats pulled low. Behind the counter was Cook himself, a wiry man with gray whiskers and sharp eyes. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Calder," he said, "heard you had some trouble. Word travels fast. It does when a man's cabin burns down and half of Harlan's crew ends up dead." Cook's gaze flicked to Mara, then back to Rhett. "You got some stones coming here. Need supplies. I can pay. Can you?" Cook wiped his hands on a rag. "Because Harlan's put out word that anyone who helps you answers to him." The 3 men at the counter shifted, hands moving closer to their belts. Rhett's voice stayed level. "And since when do you take orders from Harlan?" "Since he controls half the territory." But Cook's eyes had a gleam in them, like he was testing something. "Still, man's got a right to buy goods, provided he's got coin." Rhett pulled out a leather pouch and set it on the counter. It clinked heavy. "Silver, enough for what we need and then some." Cook picked up the pouch, weighed it in his hand, and nodded. "What do you need?" "Ammunition, bandages, flour, salt, coffee. Dried meat, if you've got it." "I've got it." Cook started pulling items from the shelves. "You plan on holing up somewhere?" "Maybe." "Smart. Harlan's gathering men in Copper Hollow. Word is he's offering $50 to anyone who brings you in. 100 if you're alive." Mara's blood went cold. "That's a bounty." "That's desperation," Cook corrected. He wrapped the supplies in canvas. "Harlan lost 4 men in that fight. Good men are hard to replace. He's scared now, which makes him dangerous." "He was always dangerous," Rhett said. "True enough." Cook tied off the bundle and pushed it across the counter. "But now he's got the law looking the other way and money to burn. You killed his people. He won't stop until you're dead or gone." One of the men at the counter spoke up. $50 is a lot of money." Rhett's hand moved to the pistol at his belt. Mara raised the rifle, not quite aiming, but ready. The man raised his hand slowly. "Easy. Just making an observation." "Observe quieter," Rhett said. Cook cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, I think your business here is done." The 3 men exchanged glances, then filed out one by one. The bell jangled behind them. When they were gone, Cook leaned forward. "You can't stay in the territory, Calder. Harlan's got too many people looking for you. I'm not running." "Then you're a dead man." Maybe. Rhett picked up the bundle. But I'll take a few more of them with me first. Cook shook his head. Stubborn as ever. He glanced at Mara. You picked a hell of a man to tie yourself to, ma'am. Didn't have much choice in the matter, Mara said. You always have a choice. Cook pulled out a bottle from under the counter and poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a tin cup. Here, for the pain. Rhett took it and drank. His color was still bad, his movements stiff. There's a cave system about 10 miles north of here, Cook said quietly. Old Shoshone territory. Nobody goes up there anymore. You could hide out, let things cool down. And then what? Then you figure out how to kill Harlan before he kills you. Rhett set the cup down. Appreciate the advice. Advice is cheap. Surviving it's the hard part. Cook slid the pouch of silver back across the counter. Keep it. You'll need it more than me. I pay my debts. Then pay me by staying alive long enough to cause Harlan more grief. Cook's smile was thin and sharp. Man's been a plague on this territory long enough. About time someone put him down. They left the trading post as the sun climbed higher, the bundle of supplies heavy on Rhett's shoulder. Mara kept glancing back, expecting to see the 3 men following, but the road stayed empty. You think they'll come after us? She asked. Not yet. They'll wait to see which way the wind blows. Rhett shifted the bundle, his face tight with pain. But eventually, $50 will sound better than caution. So we're going to this cave? Unless you've got a better idea. She didn't. They walked north, staying off the main trails. The land got rougher, rockier, the trees twisted and stunted. By midday, Rhett was stumbling more than walking. Mara got under his arm, taking some of his weight. I can manage, he said. Sure you can. Just like you can fly. Despite everything, he almost smiled. They reached the cave system as the light was starting to fail. It was a series of openings in a cliff face, half hidden by scrub oak and fallen rocks. The largest opening was maybe 6 feet high, wide enough for 2 people to walk through side by side. Inside, the cave was dry and surprisingly large. The ceiling rose up into darkness, and the floor was smooth stone. Deeper in, there were side passages and chambers. It smelled like earth and old smoke. Someone's used this before, Mara said, pointing to a fire ring near the entrance. Probably trappers, or Shoshone back when they still came through here. Rhett lowered himself to the ground with a grunt. It'll do. Mara built a fire while Rhett rested. When the flames were going, she checked his wound again. The bandage was soaked through. I need to clean this properly, she said. There's a stream outside. I saw it on the way in. She found the stream about 50 yards from the cave, cold and clear. She filled the canteen, washed the bloodied bandages as best she could, and headed back. When she returned, Rhett had his shirt off. The wound looked angry, the edges red and swollen. It's starting to fester, she said. I know. We need real medicine, alcohol at least. We've got whiskey in the supplies. It would have to do. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, Rhett hissing through his teeth but not pulling away. Then she rebandaged it with the cleanest cloth she had. You're getting good at this, he said. I've had practice. She sat back exhausted. How long can we stay here? Long as we need to, or until someone finds us. And if they do, then we deal with it. She wanted to scream at the helplessness of it all. They were hiding in a cave like animals, wounded and hunted, with nowhere to go and no one to help. But screaming wouldn't change anything. So instead, she opened the bundle of supplies and started sorting through it. Flour, salt, coffee, dried venison, ammunition. Cook had included a small sack of beans and a tin of lard. We can make this last a week if we're careful, she said. We'll have to. That night, they ate beans cooked over the fire and drank bitter coffee. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning through the rocks. It sounded like voices, like the dead come calling. Mara cleaned the pistol by firelight, her hands moving through the motions Rhett had taught her. Disassemble, clean, oil, reassemble. It was calming in a strange way, predictable. You ever think about going back east? Rhett asked. She looked up. To what? I don't know. Family, friends. I told you, I don't have any of that. She set the pistol aside. Even if I did, I'm not the same person who left. I've got blood on my hands now. We all do. Not like this. She stared into the fire. I killed a man, Rhett. Shot him in the stomach and watched him bleed out in a creek. And you know what the worst part is? What? I don't feel bad about it. I feel nothing. Just empty. He was quiet for a long moment. That's the cost. You kill to survive, and it takes something from you. A piece you don't get back. How many pieces do you have left? His smile was sad. Not many. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. What about you? Mara asked. You ever think about leaving? Every day. He poked at the fire with a stick. But this is my land, my home, or it was. Harlan doesn't get to take that. Even if it kills you? Especially then. She wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't worth it, but she understood. Out here you didn't have much, and what you had, you held on to with both hands and teeth if necessary. We should sleep, Rhett said. Tomorrow, we figure out our next move. Mara lay down near the fire, the rifle close at hand. Rhett stayed sitting up, his back against the cave wall, watching the entrance. She closed her eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. The next 3 days blurred together. Rhett's fever got worse before it got better. He spent most of the time unconscious, shivering under blankets despite the fire. Mara forced water down his throat, changed his bandages, and tried not to panic. On the 4th day, the fever broke. He woke clear-headed for the first time since they'd arrived, his eyes focusing on her face. You look like hell, he rasped. Right back at you. He tried to sit up, made it halfway, and gave up. How long was I out? 3 days. Damn. She helped him drink water, then gave him some of the dried meat to chew. He ate slowly, mechanically, like it was just fuel. Anyone come looking? He asked. Not yet. They will. I know. He studied her. You've changed. What do you mean? You're harder, sharper. He took another drink. It suits you. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. We're running low on supplies. Another few days and we'll be out of food. Then we need to move soon. You're barely strong enough to stand. I'll manage. He pushed himself up, gritting his teeth against the pain. Help me outside. I need to see the land. She got him to his feet and half-carried him to the cave entrance. The sun was bright after days in the dark, making them both squint. From this vantage point, they could see for miles. Rolling hills covered in pine and scrub. In the distance, a thin line of smoke rose from what might have been Copper Hollow. Harlan's still looking, Rhett said. He won't stop until he finds us or runs out of money. So what do? We go on the offensive. Mara stared at him. You're talking about going after him. I'm talking about ending this. His voice was hard. We can't run forever, and hiding just gives him time to bring in more men. The only way out is through. Through Harlan? Yeah. It was insane. Suicidal. They were 2 people against a man with money, men, and the law on his side. But Rhett was right. Running wouldn't save them, and hiding was just dying slowly. How? She asked. I'm still working on that part. They went back inside. Rhett was exhausted from the short walk, but there was a fire in his eyes now. Purpose. Over the next 2 days, they planned. Rhett drew maps in the dirt, marking Harlan's holdings, the land office, the general store, his house on the hill above Copper Hollow. He's got guards at the house, Rhett said. At least 3, maybe more, and he doesn't travel without protection. So how do we get to him? We don't. We make him come to us. How? Rhett looked at her. We hid his money. Harlan cares about 2 things, control and profit. Take away his profit, and he'll come running. You're talking about the water rights. I'm talking about the dam he's building. It's almost finished, and once it's operational, he'll control water to half the mining camps in the territory. That's where his real money is. So we destroy it. It was a simple plan. Probably too simple. But simple had a way of working when complicated plans fell apart. When? Mara asked. 2 days, gives me time to heal, and it's a new moon. We'll have darkness on our side. She nodded. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to accept that they were probably going to die. But maybe they'd take Harlan down with them. That night, Rhett taught her to throw a knife. It was harder than it looked, the blade tumbling end over end before clattering against the cave wall. "You're trying too hard," he said. "It's not about strength. It's about the flick of the wrist." She tried again. The knife spun and stuck barely in a crack in the wall. "Better," Rhett said. They practiced until her arm ached and her hands were blistered. When they finally stopped, Rhett looked at her with something like pride. "You're tougher than you think," he said. "I don't feel tough." "Nobody does. But you're still standing, and that counts for something." She thought about the platform in Copper Hollow. The laughter. The way she'd felt like nothing. She wasn't nothing anymore. On the 6th day, they left the cave before dawn. Rhett was still weak, but he could walk without help now. They moved through the forest like ghosts, staying low and quiet. The dam was about 8 miles northwest, in a narrow canyon where the spring water funneled through. Harlan had been working on it for over a year, pouring money into timber and stone and labor. It was nearly complete. They reached the canyon as the sun was setting. From a ridge above, they could see the dam, a massive structure of logs and rocks, 30 feet high and twice as wide. Water pooled behind it, dark and still. 3 guards patrolled the area, rifles slung over their shoulders. A small camp sat nearby, probably for the work crew. "We wait until dark," Rhett said. "Then we go in quiet. Take out the guards, set the charges." "What charges?" He pulled a bundle from his pack. "Dynamite, 6 sticks wrapped together." "Cook slipped it in with the supplies. Good man." Mara stared at the explosives. "You know how to use that?" "I've blown up a stump or two." "A stump's not a dam." "Principle's the same. Blow it in the right place and the whole thing comes down." They waited as the light bled from the sky. The guards changed shifts, 2 leaving and 1 staying to watch. A single man. Better odds. When full dark came, they moved down the ridge. Rhett went first, silent as smoke. Mara followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The guard was standing near the edge of the dam, smoking a cigarette. He never saw them coming. Rhett's knife flashed once. The guard dropped without a sound. They dragged the body into the bushes, then moved to the dam. Rhett studied the structure, running his hands over the logs and rocks. "Here," he said, pointing to a support beam near the base. "And here. We set the charges, light the fuses, and run like hell." He wedged the dynamite into the cracks, threading fuses through the sticks. His hands were steady despite the pain he had to be feeling. "How long do we have once we light it?" Mara asked. "Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe less." "That's not a lot of time." "Then we better move fast." He struck a match. The fuses caught, sputtering and sparking. "Go!" Rhett shouted. They ran. Behind them, the fuses burned down, eating toward the dynamite. Mara's lungs screamed. Her legs pumped. The forest was a blur. Then the world exploded. The blast was deafening, a wall of sound and pressure that knocked them both to the ground. Mara hit the dirt hard, her ears ringing. When she looked back, the dam was gone. Water roared through the canyon, a black torrent smashing everything in its path. Logs and rocks tumbled like toys. The guard camp was swept away in seconds, and somewhere in the distance, men were shouting, "Move!" Rhett hauled her to her feet. They ran deeper into the forest as voices echoed behind them, as torches flickered to life. They ran until they couldn't run anymore, collapsing in a ravine miles from the dam. Rhett was gasping, his wound bleeding again. Mara's chest burned, but they were alive, and Harlan's dam was rubble. "Think that'll get his attention?" Mara asked between breaths. Rhett's laugh was ragged. "I'd say so." They lay there in the dark, listening to the distant shouts fade. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky, cold and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Harlan was waking up to the news. And when he did, he'd come for them with everything he had. But for now, in this moment, they'd won. And that was enough. They didn't sleep that night, couldn't afford to. Instead, they kept moving, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ruined dam. Rhett's wound had reopened during the run, blood seeping through his shirt in a dark stain that spread with each step. Mara wanted to stop, to tend to it, but he waved her off every time she suggested it. "We stop, we die," he said through gritted teeth. Simple as that. So they walked, through pine forest and over rocky ridges, across streams swollen with runoff from the destroyed dam. The water rushed past them in the darkness, carrying debris and the remnants of Harlan's ambition. Broken timbers tumbled in the current like bones. The sound of rushing water followed them for miles, a reminder of what they'd done. Mara's legs burned. Her boots were falling apart, the soles separating from the uppers. Each step sent jolts of pain through her feet, but she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. It never did. The forest was alive with sounds. Owls called from the treetops. Something large moved through the underbrush to their left, and Rhett's hand went to the pistol at his belt before the creature, probably a deer, bounded away into the darkness. "How much further to the cave?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 3 miles. Maybe 4. Rhett stumbled over a root, caught himself. "Hard to tell in the dark." "Can you make it?" "Have to." But his breathing was getting worse, more labored with each passing minute. The blood loss was taking its toll. Mara could see it in the way his steps were getting shorter, his movements less coordinated. She got under his arm, taking some of his weight. He tried to protest, but she cut him off. "Save your strength for walking." They continued like that, Mara half carrying him through the forest. The moon emerged from behind clouds, painting everything in silver and shadow. It helped, but not much. The terrain was treacherous, full of hidden holes and loose stones that wanted to turn an ankle. By the time they saw the familiar rock face that marked the cave entrance, dawn was beginning to gray the eastern sky. Rhett was barely conscious, his feet dragging more than stepping. "Almost there," Mara said, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. "Just a little further." They stumbled into the cave as the sun broke the horizon. Rhett collapsed the moment they were inside, his face the color of old parchment. Mara lowered him as gently as she could, then immediately went to work. The wound was worse than before, much worse. The improvised stitches she'd made days ago had torn completely loose, and the flesh around the bullet hole was hot and swollen, infected. The smell hit her when she peeled back the blood-soaked bandage, sweet and rotten, the smell of meat going bad. "This is really bad," she said. Rhett's eyes flickered open. "I know. I need to clean it, properly this time." "Do what you have to." She built a fire first, then heated water in the tin cup from their supplies. While it cooled enough to use, she examined what little remained of their medical supplies. A few scraps of cloth, the last of the whiskey, a bone needle and gut thread that Rhett had packed weeks ago. It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. She cleaned the wound as thoroughly as she could, Rhett hissing through his teeth but not pulling away. The infection had spread into the surrounding tissue, angry red lines radiating outward from the bullet hole. "I need to cut away the bad flesh," she said. "You know how to do that?" "No, but I've seen it done." A lie. She'd never seen anything like this. But she'd read about it once, in a cheap dime novel back east. It seemed like madness to trust a dime novel with a man's life, but what choice did they have? She heated Rhett's knife in the fire until the blade glowed red. Then, before she could think too hard about it, she cut. Rhett's back arched. His hand clamped down on a piece of wood so hard it cracked. But he didn't scream. Didn't make a sound except for a low, animal groan that came from somewhere deep in his chest. Mara worked as quickly as she dared, removing the infected tissue and exposing clean flesh beneath. Blood welled up, but it was bright red, not the dark, sluggish stuff from before. That was good, probably. When she was done, she cauterized the wound with the hot knife again, then bandaged it with the cleanest cloth she had. The smell of burned flesh filled the cave, acrid and nauseating. Rhett had passed out at some point during the procedure. His breathing was shallow, but steady. Mara checked his pulse, fast but strong enough. She sat back, her hands shaking now that the work was done. She'd just cut into a man with a knife heated over a campfire. She'd removed flesh like she was butchering an animal, and she had no idea if any of it would help or if she'd just killed him slower. But she'd done something, and doing something was better than watching him die. She cleaned the knife and her hands, then checked their supplies. They were down to almost nothing. A handful of hardtack biscuits, a small pouch of coffee. No water except what she could carry from the stream. They couldn't stay here long, but Rhett couldn't travel either. Not for days, maybe weeks. The impossibility of their situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. They were trapped. Too hunted to stay, too weak to run. She fed more wood to the fire and sat watch, the pistol in her lap, while Rhett slept. The first day passed in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Mara dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. She changed Rhett's bandages twice, relieved each time to find the wound looking marginally better. The angry red lines were fading, the flesh cooling. He woke late in the afternoon, disoriented and fevered. "Where are we?" he rasped. "The cave. You've been out for about 12 hours. He tried to sit up, failed, fell back with a curse. "Harlan?" "I don't know. Haven't heard anything." "He'll be looking." "The dam—" Rhett coughed, the sound wet and painful. "The dam was his whole operation. Without it, he's ruined. He'll want blood. Then he'll have to find us first." "He will. Eventually." Rhett's eyes closed. "You should go, while you still can." They'd had this conversation before. She gave him the same answer. "No." "Mara, I said no. We've been over this." He didn't have the strength to argue. Within minutes, he was asleep again. Mara ventured out to refill the water containers. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just the whisper of wind through pine needles. She hurried back to the cave, her skin crawling with the feeling of being watched. That night, she heard riders. They were distant, maybe a mile away, but the sound of hoofbeats carried in the still air. Mara doused the fire immediately and moved to the cave entrance, pistol ready. Torchlight flickered through the trees. She counted at least 6 riders, maybe more. They were moving slowly, searching. For an agonizing hour they quartered the forest, coming within 100 yards of the cave before turning away. Mara didn't move, barely breathed, her finger on the trigger. Finally, the torches moved off toward the south. The sound of hooves faded, but they'd be back. She knew that with cold certainty. Harlan wouldn't give up. He couldn't afford to. She rekindled the fire, keeping it small and smokeless. Rhett was awake again, watching her with fevered eyes. "They were close," he said. It wasn't a question. "Close enough. We can't stay here much longer. You can't travel yet. Might not have a choice." He struggled to sit up, made it halfway this time. "Help me. I need to see if I can walk." She got him to his feet. He swayed, his face going gray, but he stayed upright. She walked him around the cave, his arm over her shoulders, his weight heavy against her side. After 2 circuits, he was breathing hard and covered in sweat. But he'd done it. "I can manage," he said. "Give me another day or 2. "You need a week. Minimum." "Don't have a week." He lowered himself back down carefully. 2 days. Then we move, ready or not." She wanted to argue, but she could see the logic. Better to move while they still could than wait for Harlan's men to find them. 2 days, she agreed. The second day was worse than the first. Rhett's fever spiked in the morning, and for several terrifying hours, Mara thought she was going to lose him. She packed his wound with cold compresses and forced water down his throat until he choked on it. By evening, the fever broke again. But it had taken something from him. He was weaker now, his skin hanging loose on his frame. "You need to eat," Mara said. "Not hungry." "I don't care. You need strength." She made him eat half the remaining hardtack, washing it down with weak coffee. He kept it down, which was something. That night she heard the riders again. Closer this time, much closer. She could hear them calling to each other, could make out individual words. "Check that outcropping. Nothing here. Keep looking. Harlan wants them found." Mara crouched at the cave entrance, pistol ready. If they found the cave, she'd have to shoot. There was no other option. But the pistol only had 6 rounds left, and there were at least 8 men out there. The math was simple and brutal. One of the riders came within 50 feet of the cave entrance. Mara could see him clearly in the moonlight, young, maybe 20, with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes. He was scanning the rock face, his rifle held loosely. If he looked up, he'd see the cave opening. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. The young man turned his horse and rode away. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The rider spent another hour searching, then moved on. But Mara knew they'd be back. They were closing the net, systematic and thorough. When she went back inside, Rhett was sitting up. "How close?" he asked. "Too close." "Then we leave tomorrow, first light." "You're not strong enough." "I'll have to be." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she packed what little they had, sorted ammunition, and planned their route. North, away from Copper Hollow and Harlan's center of power. Maybe they could make it to the territorial line, cross into different jurisdiction. Maybe they could survive this. Or maybe they were just delaying the inevitable. They left at dawn, just as Rhett had said. He could walk now, though each step clearly cost him. They moved slowly through the forest, staying off trails, following game paths and stream beds. By midday, they'd covered maybe 3 miles. Rhett needed to rest every few hundred yards. His breathing labored, his face slick with sweat. "We're not going to make it like this," Mara said. "We don't have a choice." There's always a choice. But she didn't know what it was. They rested in a hollow formed by fallen trees, hidden from view. Mara rationed out the last of their water and food, 2 sips each, 1 bite of hardtack that had gone soft with moisture. "Tell me something," Rhett said. "About what?" "Anything, just talk. Keeps me focused." So she talked. She told him about working in the factory back east, 12-hour days breathing lint until her lungs burned. About the boarding house where she'd lived in a room the size of a closet, sharing it with 2 other women who snored and never bathed. About the slow, grinding poverty that wore you down like water on stone. "Sounds grim," Rhett said. It was. But you know what the worst part was? She picked at the bark of a fallen log. The invisibility. I could walk down a street and people would look right through me, like I was furniture or air. "I see you." "I know." She looked at him. "That's why I stayed." They moved on as the sun started its descent. The forest was changing around them, the pines giving way to aspens and scrub oak. Drier country, more open, harder to hide in. As evening approached, they heard hoofbeats again. This time, there was nowhere to run. They were crossing an open meadow, maybe 100 yards from the tree line, when riders appeared at the far end. 4 of them, spread out in a line. Mara and Rhett froze. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the riders raised his hand and shouted, "There!" "Run," Rhett said. They ran, or tried to. Rhett managed maybe 20 yards before his legs gave out. Mara caught him as he fell, tried to pull him upright. "Leave me," he gasped. "Shut up." The riders were closing fast. She could hear the thunder of hooves, could see the dust rising behind them. She pulled out the pistol and fired. The shot went wild, but it made the riders scatter, buying them a few precious seconds. Rhett was back on his feet, stumbling forward. They made it to the tree line just as another shot rang out. Bark exploded from a tree trunk next to Mara's head. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping at their faces. Behind them, the riders had dismounted and were giving chase on foot. "Split up," Rhett panted. "They can't follow both." "No. Do it. Meet it." He stumbled, caught himself. "Meet at Cook's trading post, 3 days." "Rhett!" He shoved her hard, sending her stumbling to the left. Then he turned right and crashed through the underbrush, deliberately loud, drawing the pursuers. Mara heard shouts, men following his noise. She wanted to chase after him, to stay together, but survival instinct overrode everything else. She ran. The forest blurred around her. She ran until her lungs felt like they'd burst, until her legs turned to rubber, until she couldn't hear pursuit anymore. Then she collapsed against a tree and listened. Gunfire. Distant but unmistakable. 3 shots, then silence. "No," she whispered. More shots, then shouting, then nothing. She waited in the growing darkness, every muscle tensed. Was Rhett alive? Dead? Captured? She had no way to know. As full dark fell, she started moving again, heading east toward where she thought Cook's trading post might be. She had no supplies, no water, no food, just the pistol with 4 rounds left and the clothes on her back. She walked through the night, driven by something harder than fear. If Rhett was alive, she'd find him. If he was dead, she'd make Harlan pay. Either way, she wasn't done fighting. Dawn found her in rough country, all rocks and scrub. In the distance, she could see smoke rising, the trading post maybe, or a settlement. She walked toward it, moving on instinct now, her mind numb with exhaustion. It was the trading post. She recognized Cook's sign as she got closer. But something was wrong. Too quiet. No horses outside, no customers. She approached carefully, pistol ready. The door was open. Inside, chaos. Shelves overturned, goods scattered, blood on the floor. And Cook, sitting against the back wall with a rifle across his lap, very much alive. He looked up when she entered. "Mrs. Calloway, you look like hell." "What happened here?" "Harlan's men came through yesterday, tore the place apart looking for you and Calder." He gestured to the blood. "They got a little rough when I didn't cooperate." "Rhett, haven't seen him, but I heard gunfire north of here last night. That him?" "I think so. We got separated." Cook stood stiffly. "You need supplies. Food, water, ammunition. Take what you need." "I don't have money." "Didn't ask for any." He started gathering items: jerky, hardtack, a canteen. "Harlan's gone too far this time. A lot of folks in the territory are getting tired of his methods. Not tired enough to stop him." "Maybe, maybe not." Cook handed her the supplies. "There's talk in town. People whispering. Harlan lost 4 good men at your cabin, and the dam cost him everything. He's vulnerable now, desperate. And desperate men make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that get them killed." Cook reloaded his rifle. "You find Calder, you two lay low for a few days. Things are about to get interesting." Mara wanted to ask more, but voices outside cut her off. Men, several of them, approaching the trading post. Cook's eyes hardened. "Back room, now!" She ducked into the storage area as the door banged open. "Cook, we know you're helping them." Through a crack in the door, Mara saw 3 men enter. The one in front was the sheriff, Morrison, the nervous one from before. But he didn't look nervous now. He looked angry. "I run a trading post," Cook said calmly. "I help anyone with coin. Don't play games. Harlan wants Calder and the woman. You know where they are." "Nope." Morrison's hand went to his pistol. "I can arrest you for obstruction." "On what grounds?" "I haven't broken any laws." "Harlan says—" "Harlan doesn't make the law," Cook interrupted. "You do. Or you're supposed to." Morrison's face reddened. "You're interfering with a murder investigation." "What murder?" "Far as I know, Calder was defending his property from armed men who burned his cabin. That's not murder. That's self-defense. The territorial court will decide that." "Will it? Or will Harlan decide it and call it justice?" For a moment, Morrison looked like he might actually think about it. Then he shook his head. "I got my orders. You see Calder or the woman, you report it, or you'll be charged as an accessory." He left, his men following. Mara waited until they were well gone before emerging. "That's the law?" "That's Harlan's version of it." Cook checked the street, then closed the door. "Like I said, things are getting interesting. Morrison's not a bad man, just a weak one. But even weak men have limits." "What about Rhett? If they caught him?" "They didn't. I would have heard." Cook handed her more ammunition. "Harlan's gathering men in Copper Hollow. Word is he's offering a bounty, $50 for Calder, alive or dead. 100 if he's brought in alive." Mara's blood ran cold. "That's a lot of money." "That's desperation. Harlan's afraid, and he should be." "Why?" Cook smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Because people are starting to realize they outnumber him." Mara left the trading post as the sun climbed higher, loaded with supplies and questions. She headed north, toward where she'd last heard the gunfire. If Rhett was alive, he'd be hurting and alone. She had to find him. She searched for 2 days, covering miles of rough terrain, following the faintest signs. A broken branch here, a disturbed pile of leaves there. Once she found blood on a rock, and her heart nearly stopped. But it was old, dried brown, and she couldn't tell if it was Rhett's or someone else's. On the 3rd day, as she was beginning to lose hope, she heard a voice. "Looking for someone?" She spun, pistol raised. Rhett sat on a boulder about 20 feet away, half hidden in shadow. He looked worse than before. Pale, gaunt, his shirt soaked with blood. But he was alive, and he was smiling. "You're an idiot," Mara said, lowering the pistol. "Probably." She crossed to him, almost running. Up close, she could see new wounds, a deep cut across his forehead, bruises on his ribs, and what looked like a bullet graze on his left arm. "What happened?" "Led them on a chase, lost them in the rocks." He gestured vaguely north. "Got clipped once, but nothing vital." "Nothing vital," she repeated. "You're bleeding from 3 different places." 4, actually, but who's counting?" He tried to stand, made it halfway, and sat back down hard. Might have overdone it. She helped him drink from the canteen, then examined his wounds. The arm was the worst. The bullet had cut a deep furrow through muscle. It needed stitches. This is going to hurt, she warned. What else is new? She worked quickly, using the bone needle and gut thread Cook had provided. Rhett watched the process with detached interest, like it was happening to someone else. When she was done, he said, "We can't keep doing this." Doing what? Running, hiding, bleeding. He looked at her, and his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. Harlan's not going to stop, and we're running out of places to hide. So what do you want to do? What we should have done from the start. His jaw set in that stubborn line she knew so well. End it. The word hung between them like a blade. End it. Simple words for something that would probably get them both killed. You're talking about going after Harlan directly, Mara said. It wasn't a question. I'm talking about finishing what we started. Rhett shifted, wincing as pain lanced through his shoulder. We blew up his dam, burned down my cabin, killed his men. We're already committed. The only question is whether we die running or die fighting. Those aren't the only options, aren't they? He looked at her with those pale gray eyes that had seen too much. We can't run forever. We're out of supplies, out of places to hide. Sooner or later they'll find us, and when they do, we'll be too weak to fight back. Mara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Every word he said was true. They were bleeding, starving, exhausted. Each day made them weaker while Harlan's resources stayed the same. Cook said Harlan's in Copper Hollow, gathering men, Rhett continued. That means he's vulnerable, exposed. He's pulled his forces back to protect himself, which means he's afraid. If we're going to hit him, it has to be now, before he rebuilds his strength. How do we even get close to him? He'll have guards, guns, every advantage. That's what we need to figure out. Rhett tried to stand, made it halfway before his legs buckled. Mara caught him, easing him back down. You can barely walk, she said. I'll manage. You keep saying that. One of these days it's going to stop being true. He didn't argue, which scared her more than anything. Rhett always argued. She checked his wounds again. The shoulder was healing slowly, but the infection was gone. The other cuts and bruises were mending, but he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, and there was a hollowness to his eyes that spoke of exhaustion down to the bone. We need to rest, she said. At least one more day. Build up strength. We don't have... One day won't kill us. Going after Harlan like this will. She met his eyes. I'm not watching you die because you're too stubborn to rest. That got through to him. He nodded, just barely. One day. They stayed in the hollow through the afternoon and into evening. Mara foraged what she could, wild onions, some late berries, roots she thought might be edible. It wasn't much, but combined with their dwindling supplies, it was enough for a thin stew. Rhett slept while she cooked, his breathing deep and even. Exhaustion had finally caught up with him. Mara kept watch, the pistol in her lap, listening to the forest sounds around them. She thought about what lay ahead. Going after Harlan felt impossible, suicidal even. But Rhett was right. They couldn't keep running. Eventually they'd make a mistake or just run out of luck. Better to end it on their terms than his. The question was how. When Rhett woke, it was full dark. Mara had kept the fire small and smokeless, just enough to heat the stew. She handed him a tin cup filled with the thin broth and watched him eat. Color was returning to his face. The rest had helped. I've been thinking, she said, about Harlan. And? You said he's vulnerable because he's exposed, but he's also desperate, which makes him dangerous. Desperate men don't think straight. They make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind we can exploit. She poked at the fire with a stick. What does Harlan want more than anything? Control. Money. He wants us dead, Mara corrected. Specifically us. We've cost him everything. His dam, his men, his reputation. As long as we're alive, we're proof that he can be beaten. He can't let that stand. Rhett nodded slowly. So we use that. Make him come after us instead of us going after him. Exactly, but not out here in the wilderness where he has the advantage. Somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. You're talking about drawing him out in front of the whole town. I'm talking about making him show everyone what he really is. without the pretense of law or justice, just raw violence and greed. She looked at Rhett. People have been afraid of him for years. What if we gave them a reason to stop being afraid? How? We turn ourselves in. The words hung in the air between them. Rhett stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not, he said.
Hear me out. No, we're not walking into a noose. We're not walking into anything. We're setting a trap. Mara leaned forward. Think about it. Harlan wants us. Wants to make an example of us. So we give him what he wants. But on our terms. In front of the whole town. We show up in the square, unarmed, hands up, ready to surrender. That's suicide. It's theater. She spoke faster now, the plan crystallizing as she explained it. Harlan can't just shoot us in the back.
He needs it to look legal, justified. So he'll try to do what he did before. Stage a hanging, make a show of it. But this time we're ready. This time we have help. What help? Cook said people are ready to move against Harlan. What if they were there too? Armed, hidden, waiting. When Harlan makes his move, and he will, because he can't help himself, they step in. Rhett was shaking his head, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. You're betting our lives that Harlan will overreact. I'm betting that he's already proven he will. He tried to hang us without a trial once. He'll do it again, especially if he thinks he's won. His ego won't let him do anything else. And if you're wrong, then we die. But we were going to die anyway. At least this way, we take him down with us. Rhett was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. It's insane. Completely.
It'll probably get us killed. Most likely. But it might actually work. He looked at her, something like admiration in his eyes. When did you get so devious? I learned from watching you blow up a dam. Despite everything, he almost smiled. We'd need Cook's help, and we'd need to know we could trust the people he brings. He hates Harlan as much as we do, maybe more. Hating someone and risking your life to stop them are different things.
Then we find out which one Cook's willing to do. They rested through the night, taking turns on watch. When dawn came, they started moving toward the trading post. Slowly, carefully, staying off the main trails. It took most of the day to reach the outskirts of town. They waited until after dark to approach Cook's back door, moving through shadows, every sense alert for danger. Mara knocked softly, 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. A code Cook had mentioned once, back when they'd first bought supplies. The door opened immediately. Cook stood there with a rifle, his face hard in the lamplight. When he saw them, he lowered the weapon. About time you showed up, he said. Get inside. Quick. The back room of the trading post smelled like coffee and tobacco. Cook bolted the door behind them and gestured to chairs. You two look like you've been through hell, he observed. Feel like it too, Red admitted. But we're here to talk business. What kind of business? The kind that ends with Harlan dead or run out of the territory. Cook's eyebrows rose. He poured 3 cups of coffee and settled into his own chair. That's ambitious. You have a plan or just a death wish? Both, Mara said. She explained the idea, turning themselves in, drawing Harlan out, forcing him to show his true nature in front of the whole town. Cook listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, It could work. Could? If I can get enough people in position, if Harlan does what you think he will, if Morrison doesn't interfere, if 100 other things go right. He refilled their cups. That's a lot of ifs. You have a better idea? Rhett asked. Not really, which is why I'm not saying no. Cook stood and moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. Harlan's got maybe 15 men left that he can rely on. Lost 4 at your cabin, 3 more quit after the dam, and the rest are having second thoughts about dying for a man who can't pay them anymore. He's running out of money? Dam was his big investment. Without it, he's got property and influence, but not much cash. He's been trying to borrow from banks as far away as Sacramento, but word's gotten out that he's a bad risk. Cook smiled grimly. Turns out losing a war to 2 people doesn't inspire confidence. What about the town? Mara asked. You said people were ready to move against him. Ready to talk about it, actually doing it. He shrugged.
Fear's a hard thing to overcome. Harlan's controlled this territory for 8 years. He's crushed every challenge to his authority. People remember that.
Then we give them a reason to forget, Rhett said. Show them Harlan can bleed. He already has. You've proven that. But proving it in a fight and proving it in front of the whole town are different things. Cook turned from the window. If we do this, if we actually pull it off, everything changes. Not just for you two. For everyone. Is that a yes? Mara asked. That's a maybe leaning toward yes. He pulled out a map and spread it on the table. Let's talk specifics. You show up in the square at noon tomorrow. Where exactly? They spent the next several hours planning every detail. Where Mara and Rhett would stand. Where Cook's people would position themselves. What signals to watch for. What could go wrong and how to adapt. It was complex and fragile, a house of cards that could collapse with one wrong move. But it was a plan. Around midnight, Cook started sending out quiet messengers to his contacts. The response was slower than Mara had hoped. Some people refused outright, too scared, too invested in the status quo, too certain that Harlan would win. But others agreed. The blacksmith whose brother had been cheated out of land, the shopkeeper whose wife had been assaulted by one of Harlan's men, the rancher who'd lost water rights when Harlan dammed the stream. By dawn, Cook had commitments from 18 people. Not many, but maybe enough. They'll be in position by 11, he said, marking locations on the map. Windows here, here, and here. Doorways there and there. Someone in the church bell tower with a rifle. What about Morrison? Rhett asked. Wild card. He's Harlan's man, bought and paid for. But he's also scared, been holed up in the jail since yesterday, won't come out. Cook tapped the map where the jail sat. If he tries to interfere, we'll deal with it. How? Quickly. Not reassuring, but probably the best they could hope for. As the morning wore on, tension built in the trading post. Cook's messengers came and went, reporting positions, confirming commitments, bringing news from town. Harlan was at his house on the hill, gathering his remaining men. Word had spread that something was going to happen at noon. The town was buzzing with speculation. Around 10, Cook pulled Mara aside. You sure about this? Once you walk out there, there's no going back. I'm sure. Because if this goes wrong, I know what happens if it goes wrong. But it's going to go right. She said it with more confidence than she felt. It has to. Cook studied her face. You've changed. Since that day on the platform. You're harder now. Had to be. Yeah, world doesn't leave much choice, does it? He handed her a small pistol. Keep this hidden, just in case. I thought we were going in unarmed. You are. This is insurance. If everything goes to hell and you need a way out, you'll have one. She tucked the pistol into her boot, the weight of it both comforting and terrifying. At 11, Rhett was pacing the back room like a caged animal. His color was better after the night's rest, but tension radiated from him in waves. You don't have to do this, Mara said quietly. I can walk out there alone. Like hell you can. I'm serious. If something happens to you, then something happens to both of us. He took her hands, his grip tight. We started this together. We finish it together. She wanted to argue, to find some way to protect him, to send him somewhere safe. But there was no safe place. Not anymore. Not for either of them. All right, she said. Together. At 11:30, Cook did a final check. His people were in position. The square was filling with townspeople, drawn by rumor and curiosity. Harlan's men were visible at the edges, watching, waiting. It's time, Cook said. Mara and Rhett stood. They'd cleaned up as best they could, washed faces, straightened clothes, tried to look less like fugitives and more like people ready to face justice. It didn't really work, but it would have to do. At the door, Cook gripped Rhett's shoulder. Good luck. And if this works, you two owe me drinks for the rest of my life. If this works, you can have the whole bottle. They stepped out into sunlight that felt too bright, too clean for what they were about to do. The street was strangely quiet, people watching from windows and doorways but not approaching. Word had definitely spread. They walked toward the square, side by side, hands empty and visible. Every step felt like walking toward the gallows, which, if this went wrong, they probably were. The square came into view. The platform where Mara had first stood, unwanted and alone, was still there. Weathered wood and old humiliation, full circle. People lined the edges of the square, maybe 50, maybe more. Silent, watching. Mara saw familiar faces. Pritchard, who'd called her an error. Garrett, the rancher with his mail-order bride. Others she didn't recognize. And there, at the far end, mounted on his black horse like a conqueror, was Victor Harlan. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner, harder, with dark shadows under his eyes. The dam's destruction had aged him, but his smile was the same, cold and certain and cruel. Mara and Rhett stopped in the center of the square. Exposed, vulnerable, committed. Harlan walked his horse forward slowly, savoring the moment. His men, she counted 14, flanked him, rifles ready. "Mr. Calder! Mrs. Calloway!" His voice carried across the square, pitched for the crowd. "I'm surprised. I didn't think you had the courage to face justice." "This isn't justice," Rhett said calmly, "but we're tired of running, so here we are. How noble." Harlan dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with deliberate weight. "But I'm afraid your nobility comes too late. You've murdered my men, destroyed my property, terrorized this territory." He gestured broadly, playing to the crowd. "The penalty for such crimes is death." "Without a trial?" Mara asked, her voice carrying. "Without witnesses or evidence or any pretense of law?" "The evidence is clear. Everyone knows what you did." "Everyone knows you tried to steal Rhett's land," Mara countered, louder now. "Everyone knows you hired men to burn us out of our home. Everyone knows you're a thief and a murderer hiding behind money and lawyers and bought officials." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Harlan's smile tightened. "Careful, Mrs. Calloway. Slander won't help your case." "It's not slander if it's true." His hand moved toward his pistol. Mara tensed, ready to dive for the gun in her boot if necessary. But before Harlan could draw, a voice rang out from the jail. "Mr. Harlan!" Morrison emerged, his uniform rumpled, his face pale but determined. He walked toward the center of the square, every step uncertain but continuing. "These people have surrendered," Morrison said. His voice shook, but it carried. "They deserve a trial. A real trial, with a judge and jury. That's the law." Harlan turned on him, fury flashing across his face. "Stay out of this, Morrison. This doesn't concern you. And the sheriff. Law enforcement concerns me. I am the law in this territory. I built this town. I provide the jobs, the infrastructure, the order." Harlan's voice rose, his control slipping. "Without me, this place is nothing." "Without you, maybe we'd be something better," Morrison said quietly. The square went silent. Harlan stared at Morrison like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he laughed, bitter and harsh. "You ungrateful. I made you sheriff. I gave you that badge. I own you." "You did. You bought me. Bought my silence. Bought my compliance." Morrison's hand rested on his pistol now. "But you don't own me anymore." "Then you're as dead as they are." Harlan drew his gun. Everything happened at once. Morrison dove for cover. Harlan fired, the bullet kicking up dirt where the sheriff had been standing. Mara dropped and rolled, reaching for the pistol in her boot, and windows shattered as Cook's people opened fire. Rifles cracked from 3 directions. Harlan's men scattered, some returning fire, others diving for cover. One went down immediately, clutching his leg. Another dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Mara came up with the pistol, aiming at Harlan, but he was already moving, using his horse as cover, firing toward the windows. People in the square were screaming, running. The carefully planned ambush dissolved into chaos. Rhett tackled one of Harlan's men who'd gotten too close, both of them going down hard. They struggled for the man's rifle. Mara ran toward them, but another of Harlan's men stepped into her path. Big, scarred, with dead eyes. He raised his rifle. She shot him. The pistol kicked in her hand. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped, cursing. Everything was noise and smoke and confusion. Mara couldn't tell who was winning, couldn't see Rhett in the chaos. Then someone grabbed her from behind. She struggled, but the grip was iron. Hot breath on her neck, the smell of sweat and tobacco. "Got you now, bitch!" She drove her elbow back hard, felt it connect with something soft. The grip loosened. She spun and fired again, point blank. The man fell away, blood spreading across his chest. She'd just killed someone. Again. The thought was there and gone, pushed aside by the need to survive. Where was Rhett? She scanned the square, desperate. Bodies on the ground, too many to count. People running, gunfire still crackling from windows. There. Rhett was on his feet, the rifle in his hands now, trading shots with two of Harlan's men behind a wagon. And there, Harlan himself, backing toward his horse, firing as he moved. Mara ran toward him. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. She just ran, the pistol up, closing the distance. Harlan saw her coming. His gun swung toward her. She fired first. The bullet caught him in the side, just below the ribs. He stumbled, his face going white with shock. "You—" he gasped. She fired again. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Harlan raised his gun with shaking hands. Blood soaked his vest, but his eyes were full of hate. A rifle cracked from above. Harlan jerked, a red flower blooming on his shoulder. He dropped his gun, fell to his knees. Mara looked up. In the church bell tower, a figure waved, one of Cook's people. Around the square, the gunfire was dying down. Harlan's men were surrendering or fleeing. The resistance had won. Mara walked to where Harlan knelt in the dirt. He looked up at her, his face gray with shock and blood loss. "You've destroyed me," he whispered. "No," she said. "You destroyed yourself. We just refused to let you destroy us too." His eyes glazed over. He slumped forward into the dirt. Mara stood over him, breathing hard, the empty pistol heavy in her hand. It was over. Really, truly over. "Mara." She turned. Rhett was running toward her, limping but alive. Blood on his face, but his own this time, from a split lip. She met him halfway, and they collided in an embrace that was as much about confirming they were both alive as anything else. "You all right?" he asked into her hair. "Yeah. You?" "I'll live." Around them, the square was carnage. 3 of Harlan's men dead, 5 more wounded. 2 of Cook's people hurt, but not seriously. And Harlan himself bleeding out in the dirt. Morrison emerged from cover, his gun drawn, looking shell-shocked. He stared at Harlan's body, then at Mara and Rhett. "Is he—" Morrison couldn't finish the sentence. Cook knelt by Harlan, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he stood and shook his head. "He's gone." A strange silence fell over the square. People emerged from hiding, from buildings, from wherever they'd taken shelter. They stood in clusters, staring at Harlan's body, at the aftermath of violence. And slowly, expressions began to change, fear giving way to something else. Relief, liberation, hope. "It's over," someone said. A woman, one of the shopkeepers. "He's really gone." Others took up the refrain. "It's over. He's gone. We're free." Morrison stood in the center of it all, still holding his gun, looking lost. Cook approached him. "You did good, Morrison, standing up to him. That took guts." "I should have done it years ago," Morrison said quietly. "I let him—" He stopped, swallowed. "I let him do things. Terrible things. And I looked away." "You can't change the past," Cook said, "but you can do better going forward." Morrison looked at Mara and Rhett. "I'm sorry for all of it, for letting it get this far." Mara wanted to say something bitter, something about how his apology didn't undo the fear and the running and the violence. But looking at his face, at the genuine regret there, she couldn't. "You stood up when it mattered," she said instead. "That counts for something." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Bodies were removed. Wounded were treated. Morrison officially arrested Harlan's surviving men and locked them in the jail. The town was in shock, people gathering in small groups to process what had happened. Some celebrated, others mourned, even tyrants had supporters. But the overriding emotion was relief. As evening fell, Cook found Mara and Rhett sitting on the steps of the trading post. They looked exhausted, covered in dirt and blood and bruises. "You two should get that looked at," he said, gesturing to their various injuries. "We're fine," Rhett said. "You're not. But I know better than to argue." Cook sat down beside them. "Morrison wants to talk to you about what happens next." "Are we under arrest?" Mara asked. "No, opposite, actually. He wants to officially clear you of all charges. Self-defense, he's calling it. Says he'll testify to that if needed." "And people will believe him?" "After today? Yeah. They'll believe anything that's not what Harlan said. Cook pulled out a flask and passed it around. You did it. You actually did it. Took down the biggest bastard in the territory. We had help, Rhett said. Still, that took guts. And luck. Mostly luck, honestly. They sat in silence, passing the flask, watching the sun set over a town that was fundamentally changed. What will you do now? Cook asked. Leave, Mara said. Go far away from here and never look back. Smart. There'll be questions, legal stuff, probably a territorial investigation. Best if you're not around for all that. When should we go? Tonight, if you can. Tomorrow morning at the latest. He pulled out a heavy pouch, heavier than the others he'd given them. This is from the people. Everyone who could spare something contributed. Figure you've earned it. Rhett started to protest, but Cook cut him off. Don't. You freed this town from a tyrant. That's worth more than silver. Take it. Start fresh somewhere. Thank you, Mara said quietly, for everything. Thank me by living long enough to spend that money. Cook stood. I'll have supplies ready by morning. Food, ammunition, whatever you need. Head west, stay off of the main trails, and don't tell anyone where you're going. We won't. That night they slept in the back room of the trading post, really slept, for the first time in weeks. Not the half-conscious vigilance of fugitives, but actual rest. When Mara woke, dawn light was streaming through the window. Rhett was already up, checking their supplies. His movements were stiff but purposeful. Ready? He asked. Yeah, let's get out of here. Cook had prepared everything. Food, water, ammunition, even clean clothes to replace their blood-stained rags. They changed quickly, feeling almost human again. As they were loading supplies, Morrison appeared. Wanted to catch you before you left, he said. He handed Rhett a paper. Official pardon from me as territorial sheriff. It's not much, but it should keep bounty hunters off your trail. If anyone questions it, tell them to contact me. Appreciate it, Rhett said. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I also wanted to say, I know I can't fix what I allowed to happen, but I'm going to try to do better, for whatever that's worth. It's worth something, Mara said. Just don't forget this feeling, the guilt, the regret. Use it to be better. I will. They left Copper Hollow as the sun was climbing, riding west on horses Cook had provided. The town was quiet, most people still asleep or recovering from yesterday's violence. Only a few people saw them go. Some waved, others just watched. Mara didn't look back. They rode for 3 days before stopping at a small settlement for supplies. The storekeeper didn't recognize them, didn't ask questions, just sold them what they needed and sent them on their way. By the end of the first week, they were far enough from Copper Hollow that the name meant nothing. People here had their own problems, their own tyrants or heroes or daily struggles. 2 more travelers passing through barely registered. It felt like freedom. They kept moving west, through mountains and valleys, across rivers and plains. The land changed around them, drier, more open, the vegetation shifting from pine to oak to scrub. 2 weeks into the journey, they reached Northern California. The settlement they found was small, maybe 40 buildings scattered across a valley. Gold country, though the easy gold was long gone. Now it was farmers and ranchers trying to make a living from hard land. What do you think? Rhett asked, looking out over the valley. It's far enough, Mara said. Far enough from everything. They inquired about land and found a parcel for sale, 10 acres with a creek, good soil, a view of mountains. The price was reasonable, especially with Cook's silver weighing down their saddlebags. They bought it that same day. The seller was an old prospector heading back east, tired of breaking his back for nothing. He showed them the boundaries, pointed out the best spots for a cabin and garden, then took his money and left. Just like that, they owned land. Where do we start? Mara asked, standing in what would become their home. Cabin first. Need shelter before winter. They started building the next day. Neither of them knew what they were doing, not really, but they figured it out as they went, selecting trees, cutting logs, stripping bark, notching ends. It was brutal work, and they made mistakes constantly. The first wall collapsed twice before they got the angle right. The door frame was crooked, the roof leaked in 3 places, but slowly, impossibly, a cabin took shape. The neighbors, a farming family a mile down the valley, came by to help sometimes. The father, a quiet man named Jensen, showed them proper notching techniques. His wife brought food. Their kids ran around, treating the construction site like an adventure. "You folks running from something?" Jensen asked one day, casual-like. Rhett tensed, but Mara answered smoothly. "Just looking for a fresh start." "Aren't we all?" Jensen handed Rhett a better saw. "Past is past. What matters is what you build going forward." It took 6 weeks to finish the cabin. Small, one room, rough but solid. Mara stood in the doorway on the day they completed it and felt something she'd never experienced before. Pride. Not in being chosen or accepted or tolerated, but in building something with her own hands. They spent the next months expanding. A garden plot, cleared and fenced. A chicken coop. A small barn for the horses, and eventually a milk cow they bought from Jensen. Winter came, gentler than the mountains, but still cold. They spent long evenings by the fire, planning the spring planting, talking about what came next. "You think they're looking for us?" Mara asked one night. "Maybe, but we're far enough now. Different territory, different jurisdiction. Morrison's pardon should hold. And if it doesn't," Rhett looked at her, "then we deal with it, together." Spring brought new life to the valley. They planted vegetables, potatoes, beans, carrots, onions, hardy things that could survive inexperienced farmers. Mara started going into town once a week for supplies and gossip. The locals were friendly enough, if a bit reserved. She was careful, watching for signs that someone recognized them or was asking the wrong questions. But nothing came. They were just another couple trying to make a life in hard country. One day in late spring, she came home to find Rhett talking with a stranger. A man in his 50s, weathered and lean, with the look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. "Mara, this is Dalton," Rhett said. "He's looking for ranch hands, wondered if I'd be interested in part-time work." "What kind of work?" "Cattle drives, mostly. Breaking horses, fix fences, that kind of thing." Rhett looked at her, and she could see the question in his eyes. Was it safe? She studied Dalton. He had an honest face, tired eyes. Not the look of someone who'd betray them for bounty money. "Pays fair," Dalton said, "and I mind my own business. Don't care about what folks did before, just whether they can work." "I can work," Rhett said. "Then you're hired. Start Monday if you're willing." After Dalton left, Mara asked, "You sure about this?" "We need the money. Garden won't produce for months, and cooked silver won't last forever." Rhett looked at their small cabin, their fledgling farm. "Besides, it'll be good to work, to do something normal." He was right. They couldn't hide forever. At some point, they had to trust that they'd run far enough, changed enough, that the past wouldn't find them. Rhett started working for Dalton 3 days a week. The work was hard. Cattle were stubborn, horses unpredictable, fences endless. But he came home tired in a good way, with stories about close calls with ornery bulls and the other ranch hands' jokes. He was healing. Not just his body, but something deeper. Mara took over more of the farm work. She learned to tend chickens, to recognize when plants needed water or were diseased, to fix the 100 small things that broke on a homestead. She also started teaching. The settlement had a few families with children but no school. When she mentioned she could read and write, parents started asking if she'd teach their kids. She started with 3 students in her cabin. Within a month, she had 8. By fall, they'd built a small schoolhouse, and she had 15 students ranging from 6 to 14. The work was satisfying in a way she'd never expected. Teaching children to read, watching their faces light up when words suddenly made sense, knowing she was giving them something no one could take away. One evening, maybe a year after they'd arrived, Rhett came home from the ranch with news. "Dalton's selling," he said. "He's getting too old for ranch work, wants to retire. He offered to sell me a partnership stake." "How much?" "More than we have, but he's willing to work out payments. Says I've proven myself, and he'd rather sell to someone he trusts than a stranger." Mara thought about it. A ranch partnership meant stability, income, a real future. It also meant putting down roots, becoming part of the community in a way they couldn't easily undo. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to say yes, if you're comfortable with it." She looked around their cabin, at the life they'd built from nothing, at the future stretching ahead, no longer defined by fear and running. "I'm comfortable with it." They signed the partnership papers a week later. It wasn't a huge operation, maybe 200 head of cattle, some horses, decent grazing land, but it was theirs, or partly theirs. More than they'd ever thought they'd have. The years passed in that strange way they do when you're working hard and mostly content. One season bled into the next. The farm grew. The school expanded. They became fixtures in the community, reliable, respected, trusted. Sometimes, late at night, Mara would wake with her heart pounding, dreaming of gunfire and blood and platforms. Rhett had his nightmares too. She'd wake to find him sitting outside, staring at the stars, wrestling with ghosts only he could see. But those moments became less frequent. The past was still there, but it was fading, losing its power over them. 5 years after leaving Copper Hollow, they received a letter. It had been forwarded through several post offices, following rumors and half-remembered names, but it finally found them. It was from Cook. He wrote that Copper Hollow had changed. Morrison was still sheriff, but a fair one now. The town had grown, prospered even, without Harlan's stranglehold. New businesses had opened. People spoke freely. It was, he wrote, like the whole territory had taken a deep breath after holding it too long. He also wrote that all legal issues had been resolved. The territorial governor had officially pardoned Mara and Rhett, citing self-defense and acknowledging Harlan's corruption. They were free to return if they chose. "You want to go back?" Rhett asked after reading the letter. Mara thought about it, about the platform, and the fear, and the woman she'd been. "No," she said finally. "That was another life. I like this one better." "Me too." They burned the letter and never spoke of going back. More years passed. They grew older, gray creeping into hair, lines deepening in faces. Their bodies bore the marks of hard work. Rhett's shoulders still ached when rain was coming. Mara's hands were rough with calluses. But they were alive. Together. Free. The school grew to 25 students. Mara hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Sacramento who'd come west looking for adventure. The ranch expanded. Rhett eventually bought out Dalton's remaining share and became the sole owner. They hired hands, built new fences, bred better cattle. They became prosperous, not wealthy, but comfortable. Respected members of the community. People came to them for advice, for help, for the kind of steady presence that comes from surviving the worst and still standing. One evening, maybe 10 years after leaving Copper Hollow, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become a ritual, this quiet moment at the end of the day. "You ever think about her?" Rhett asked. "Who?" "The woman on the platform, the one who was an error," Mara smiled. "Sometimes. She seems like a stranger now. She was brave, braver than she knew. She was terrified. Same thing sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence. Around them their land stretched out, garden producing, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens settling for the night. The life they'd built, one painful step at a time. "Rhett," Mara said. "Yeah?" "I'm happy." The words felt strange, almost foreign, but they were true. "Me too," he said. That night, lying in bed, Mara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The platform, the cabin burning, the cave, the dam exploding, the square in Copper Hollow where everything had ended and begun. So much violence, so much pain, so many pieces of themselves they'd lost along the way. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd built something real, and that was worth every scar, every nightmare, every moment of fear. The world had called her nothing, had tried to erase her, discard her, pretend she didn't matter. But she'd refused. That refusal had cost her, but it had also saved her. And in refusing to be nothing, she'd become something the world couldn't take away. Someone who mattered. To Rhett, to her students, to the community they'd joined. But most importantly, to herself. That was the real victory. Not defeating Harlan, though they'd done that. Not escaping with their lives, though that too. The real victory was in choosing herself. In deciding she deserved more than what the world offered. In fighting for that right, even when it seemed impossible. That fight had transformed her. From the woman on the platform, invisible, disposable, an error, to the woman lying in this bed, in this cabin, on this land. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was hers. And that was everything. The next morning brought work, as all mornings did. Fences to mend, lessons to teach, meals to cook, a life to maintain. It was ordinary, mundane, the kind of day most people never noticed because it wasn't dramatic or exciting. But to Mara, who'd fought for the right to have ordinary days, it was perfect. She worked in the garden, pulling weeds, checking plants. The sun was warm on her back. Her hands were dirty. Simple, physical work that required no violence, no fear, no running. Just work. Just life. At noon, she walked to the schoolhouse to teach. Her students were waiting, eager and loud and full of questions. She taught them letters, numbers, how to think critically and question what they were told. She taught them to refuse to be nothing. That evening, when Rhett came home from the ranch, they ate dinner together. Beef stew and fresh bread, simple food that tasted better because they'd earned it. "Good day?" he asked. "Good day," she confirmed. That night they sat on the porch again. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched over them through everything. "Rhett?" Mara said. "Yeah? We made it." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw everything they'd been through, the fire and fear and fighting, the refusal to quit even when quitting would have been easier, the stubborn, foolish, brave decision to keep going. "We did," he said. "Against all odds, we did." They sat together in the darkness, two people who'd been thrown away and had refused to stay discarded, two people who'd fought for the right to exist, and won. The end didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, like most real endings do. They grew old together. Their bodies wore out slowly, the price of hard work and hard living. But they faced it together, same as they'd faced everything else. The ranch passed to trusted hands. The school continued. The community they'd helped build thrived. And on a spring evening, 30 years after that day on the platform in Copper Hollow, Mara sat on her porch one last time. Rhett had passed 2 years before, his heart finally giving out. She'd mourned him, deeply and honestly. But she'd kept living, because that's what survivors did. Now, at the end of her own journey, she looked out at the land they'd built together and felt complete. She'd been nothing, an error, unwanted. And she'd refused to accept it. That refusal had defined her life, had given her purpose, strength, love, meaning. The world had tried to break her, and she'd broken it right back. As the sun set one final time, painting the sky in colors she'd seen 1,000 times but never tired of, Mara closed her eyes and smiled. She'd lived, really, truly lived. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.